The first time I noticed it, it was just a kiss that felt delayed. Not refused. Not cold enough to start a fight. Just delayed, like she had to remember to do it. Like basic affection had quietly moved from instinct to obligation, and I was the last person in the marriage willing to admit that meant something. Her name was Dana, and by the time all this started, we had been married a little over 6 years. Long enough to have a rhythm. Long enough to know each other's moods by the sound of a footstep in the hallway. I was 37, worked in commercial HVAC, and had the kind of schedule that made home feel sacred to me. Dana was 34, worked in medical billing, and had always been the social one between us. She was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays without reminders, sent thoughtful texts, and could make people feel close to her very quickly. For most of our marriage, I had been proud of that. Then somehow I became the one person she treated like closeness was work. It didn't happen all at once. That's what made it so hard to grab onto. If she had suddenly stopped touching me, stopped talking to me, stopped acting like my wife entirely, maybe I would have dealt with it sooner. But that's not how it happened. It was slower than that. More polite. More confusing. She still kissed me goodbye in the morning. She still said love you before bed. She still sat beside me on the couch sometimes. But every one of those things started feeling thinner. Like there was less of her inside them. A kiss became a quick press of the lips instead of something warm and natural. A hug became one arm and half a second. If I reached for her hand in the kitchen, she gave it to me, but loosely, absent-mindedly, like she was handing over a receipt. At night, if I put my arm around her, she didn't exactly pull away. She just went still in this subtle, careful way that told me I was being tolerated, not wanted. That kind of rejection does something strange to a man when it comes from his wife. Not the loud kind. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind. The kind that leaves you no clean reason to complain. Because if you complain, you sound needy. Petty. Oversensitive. You sound like a guy making a problem out of nothing, even while that nothing keeps sitting heavier on your chest every week. At first, I told myself it was stress. That was easy to believe because life had been full lately. Her mother had some health stuff that turned into frequent phone calls. Work had gotten busier for her. She said she felt drained all the time, mentally touched out, socially overloaded, emotionally worn thin. Every explanation made sense on its own. And when you love someone, you tend to accept explanations one at a time without noticing the pattern they're forming together. Then the girls' dinners became weekly. That was new. Dana had always met friends now and then. I never cared about that. She had a few women she'd known since college, plus a couple from work she liked enough to keep up with outside the office. Sometimes they'd grab drinks. Sometimes brunch. Once in a while a birthday dinner or some last-minute weeknight thing. Normal. Harmless. Married people are supposed to have lives outside each other. But then somewhere around early spring, girls' dinner stopped sounding occasional and started sounding scheduled. Every Thursday at first. Then sometimes Thursday and one other night. Then back to Thursday, but protected in this weirdly firm way that made me notice. If I suggested dinner together that night, she already had plans. If I mentioned maybe inviting another couple over, she had plans. If her mother asked for help with something, she'd say she could do it any other evening but not Thursday. The routine tightened around that dinner like it mattered more than the name suggested. Again, I tried to be normal about it. A woman is allowed to see her friends. I knew that. But what started bothering me wasn't the dinners themselves. It was everything around them. Dana could spend all Tuesday night saying she was too exhausted to talk much, too drained to watch anything, too overstimulated for me to keep an arm around her very long on the couch. Then Thursday would come, and suddenly she had energy. Real energy. She'd get home from work, go straight to the bedroom, and emerge 40 minutes later looking sharper than she had from me in months. Not glamorous. Not over the top. Just intentional. Hair done. Makeup done carefully. Earrings she usually forgot about. Perfume she claimed she hadn't worn in forever. An outfit that looked chosen instead of grabbed. And the whole time she'd move with this quiet focus that made the apartment feel like a backstage area I wasn't part of. The first few times, I barely reacted. I'd tell her she looked nice. She'd smile, say thanks, and keep checking something on her phone. I'd ask where they were going, and she'd give me one of those vague but technically acceptable answers. Somewhere downtown. Just a place Megan picked. Some tapas place. I don't know, one of the girls made the reservation. The details were always blurry in a way that was hard to challenge without sounding suspicious for no reason. What really got to me was the change in her mood. Around me, Dana had become careful, polite, distracted. Around those dinners, she looked lighter. More awake. Like there was a part of her that only seemed to come alive when she was walking out the door away from me. One Thursday, I got home a little earlier than usual and found her standing in front of the bedroom mirror. She had one earring in, one still in her hand, and she was smiling slightly at her own reflection while she adjusted her hair. That image stayed with me way longer than it should have. Not because there's anything wrong with a woman looking nice before dinner with friends. There isn't. It stayed with me because I realized I hadn't seen that particular expression on her face in a long time. That quiet, private anticipation. That awareness of herself. That little spark. I couldn't remember the last time she had looked that pleased to be seen, and suddenly there it was, just not for me. She noticed me in the doorway and asked if I was home early. I said yeah. Then I made some joke about her looking like she was headed somewhere fancier than a girl's dinner. She laughed, but there was something thin in it. She said they were just trying a nicer place for once, and then she asked if I minded grabbing my own dinner because she'd probably be out late. Probably be out late. That phrasing sat badly with me for reasons I couldn't explain at the time. I told her it was fine. I kissed her on the cheek. She gave me that delayed little kiss back, almost like an afterthought, and then she was gone. She came home after 11 smelling like perfume and restaurant air and something else I couldn't place. Not alcohol exactly. Not smoke. Just outside. She was in a surprisingly good mood. Not affectionate. Not warm toward me, exactly. But brighter. She moved around the kitchen lightly, got herself water, kicked off her heels, and told me dinner had been fun. I asked who all was there, and she listed names so fast I barely caught them. Megan, Claire, maybe Jenna came late, I think Dara stopped by after. The answer felt messy, but she said it with enough natural speed that I let it go. Then she leaned over, kissed my forehead like I was a child already tucked in, and went to shower. I sat there in front of a muted TV feeling stupid for being unsettled by any of it. That became the pattern. Thursday came. She dressed up. She left. She came back later than dinner should reasonably require. She was either brighter than usual or strangely sealed off, with not much in between. Meanwhile, at home, simple affection kept thinning out. The next time it really hit me was on a Sunday afternoon. We were in the kitchen cleaning up after lunch, and I slid behind her for a second, just playful, one hand at her waist, chin near her shoulder. Something we used to do without either of us thinking twice. She tensed immediately and let out this little breath like I had added one more task to a long list. Then she caught herself and said she was sorry, she was just touched out. Touched out. That phrase landed harder than she probably meant it to. Because I had barely touched her at all. I stepped back, told her it was okay, and we both pretended the moment hadn't revealed anything. But it had. It told me she could spend hours getting ready for a dinner she never seemed too tired to attend, yet somehow my hand at her waist for 3 seconds felt like pressure. After that, I started noticing more. Her phone on the table, face down more often. The way she smiled at it sometimes without explanation. How vague her stories from dinner were. Not necessarily fake. Just soft around the edges. Hard to picture clearly. One restaurant turned into another. One friend maybe showed, maybe didn't. She could recount a funny thing a server said but somehow not be fully sure who all had actually been there. Once, I asked if Megan's husband ever complained about how often these dinners were happening. Dana looked at me strangely and asked why he would. I said no reason. Just seemed like everybody was meeting a lot lately. She shrugged and said people need their own lives. That answer should have been harmless. Instead it felt prepared. A week later, Thursday came again, and this time she wore a black dress I hadn't seen in months. Not fancy, but fitted enough that it made me look twice. She put on lipstick in the hallway mirror, grabbed her purse, and checked her phone 3 separate times in under a minute. I asked where they were going. She said she wasn't sure yet. They were deciding. That made no sense. She was already dressed and nearly out the door. Still, I let it go. I always let it go. Then, right before she left, I leaned in and kissed her. And for 1 second, I felt it again. That delay. That almost invisible pause where my wife seemed to decide whether even that much affection was worth the effort before giving it back. She smiled after, but it looked tired. Managed. Then she walked out the door looking more alive than she ever had on a night that belonged to us. A few minutes later, while I was standing in the kitchen trying to convince myself I was imagining the whole shift in our marriage, her phone buzzed on the counter. She had forgotten it. The screen lit up with a message preview. I only saw one line before it went dark again. But it was enough to make my stomach tighten. It wasn't from any woman's name I recognized. And it definitely didn't sound like dinner plans. I stared at the dark screen for a few seconds after the message disappeared, like it might light back up again and turn into something harmless. It didn't. I told myself there were innocent explanations. A cousin. A co-worker. Somebody confirming plans for the restaurant. Maybe one of Dana's friends had changed numbers, and I just hadn't seen the name before. That would have been the healthy thing to believe. The fair thing. But fairness starts getting harder when it has to keep dragging more weight than the truth. I stood there in the kitchen with her forgotten phone on the counter and my own pulse thudding harder than it should have. I did not pick it up. I need that clear. I thought about it. Of course I did. But something in me still wanted to believe there was a line between suspicion and becoming the kind of husband who grabbed his wife's phone the second he felt insecure. So I left it where it was. About 3 minutes later, I heard keys at the door. Dana came back in too quickly for it to feel casual. Not panicked, exactly. But fast enough that I knew the missing phone had hit her midway to wherever she was going and mattered enough for her to turn around immediately. She stepped inside, looked at the counter first, then at me. I tried to act normal. Asked if she forgot something. She smiled, but it was tight. Said yeah, just my phone. Then she picked it up, slipped it into her purse, and gave me a kiss on the cheek that felt even more rushed than usual. And then she was gone again. That tiny moment stayed with me all night. Not because it proved anything by itself. It didn't. But it fit too neatly into everything else. The weekly dinners. The vague stories. The energy she saved for leaving. The way basic affection with me had started feeling like something she completed out of duty while some other part of her seemed very much awake somewhere else. She got home after 11:30 that night. Later than usual. She was still in a good mood, but this time there was something polished about it, like she had already decided how the night would be presented before she walked through the door. She kicked off her shoes, set her purse on the chair, and told me dinner had run long because they all got to talking. She said it with a light laugh, the kind meant to make the explanation feel too normal to question. I asked where they ended up going. She named a place downtown. I asked who all made it. She listed Megan, Claire, Tara, and maybe Jenna for part of it, then corrected herself and said no, not Jenna, I think it was Lauren. She said it quickly, almost like she was trying to outrun the details before they settled. That answer bothered me more than I let show. Because people who actually spend 3 or 4 hours at dinner together usually know who was there. Still, I told myself not to be ridiculous. Maybe I was getting in my own head. Maybe the message preview meant nothing. Maybe I was so starved for warmth from my own wife that I had started treating every inconsistency like the beginning of a disaster. The problem was, once I noticed the pattern, it kept growing. The following Thursday, Dana spent most of Wednesday evening acting half exhausted. She barely touched her dinner, barely talked, and when I tried putting my hand on her knee while we watched TV, she gave me a tired smile and shifted like she just needed a little space. Then Thursday came, and somehow the fatigue vanished right on schedule. She got home from work, showered, did her makeup more carefully than usual, and stood in front of the mirror trying on 2 different pairs of earrings. I asked if it was the same group as last time. She said probably. Probably. That word just hung there between us. I made some joke about these dinners starting to feel pretty serious if jewelry decisions were involved, and she smiled without really smiling. She said it was nice to feel put together once in a while. Then she checked her phone again. That was another thing I started noticing. The phone mattered more on Thursdays. Not in a dramatic way. She wasn't grinning at it nonstop or hiding in corners. It was subtler than that. She just seemed tuned to it. Waiting on it. Like part of her attention stayed attached to the screen even when she wasn't looking at it. By then, I had begun paying attention in a way I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. I noticed that her tone around me and her tone on dinner nights had become 2 different languages. At home, she sounded calm, flat, polite. On Thursdays, even when she wasn't speaking much, there was a lift in her. A kind of quiet anticipation I couldn't remember the last time I had felt directed toward me. I also noticed what happened after the dinners. She almost never came home affectionate. That should sound obvious, maybe, but I don't mean she came home tired and went to bed. I mean there was often this strange emotional sealed-off quality to her. Like she had already used up whatever version of herself felt alive that night, and I was getting the shell that came back afterward. If I asked too many questions, even light ones, she got gently evasive. If I didn't ask anything, she acted relieved. One Saturday morning, I was making coffee when her phone lit up on the counter while she was still asleep. Again, face down at first. Then vibrating enough to turn slightly. I only saw the name for half a second when the screen tilted. It was saved as just a first name. Chris. No heart. No emoji. Nothing obvious. But not one of her friends. At least not one I had ever heard her mention. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't even unlock it. I just stood there holding the coffee scoop, staring at that name like it might mean less if I looked away fast enough. When she came into the kitchen a minute later, hair still messy from sleep, she saw me looking in the direction of the counter and immediately picked the phone up. That reaction was small. Almost natural. And still, it told me something. She glanced at the screen, then slipped it into the pocket of her robe before asking if I had made enough coffee for both of us. Her tone was light. Normal. But the movement had been automatic, almost protective. I asked, as casually as I could, who Chris was. The question made her pause. Not long. Just enough. Then she said he worked with Megan's husband and had been helping organize some charity thing their group had talked about supporting. She said it like the answer already existed, fully built, just waiting to be used. Maybe it was true. Maybe it wasn't. The issue was no longer any single detail. It was how every answer from her seemed to arrive already softened, already arranged into something hard to press on. A few days later, I ran into Megan's husband, Paul, at a hardware store. We weren't close, but we knew each other enough to stop and talk. We spent a couple of minutes on the usual things. Work. Weather. Some project he was doing at the house. Then I asked, casually, how Megan was doing. He said she was good, just busy. I mentioned that Dana seemed to be enjoying all these weekly dinners lately. Paul gave me a confused look. Not dramatic. Not suspicious. Just confused. Then he laughed and said Megan wished she had time for weekly dinners. Between work and everything else, she barely made it out once every few weeks lately. He kept talking after that. I don't remember about what. Because that one sentence had already done the damage. I just nodded along and finished the conversation like a person whose insides weren't suddenly trying to rearrange themselves. Then I got in my truck and sat there staring through the windshield for a while, replaying his exact wording. Barely made it out once every few weeks. So either Megan wasn't there most of the time, or Paul somehow knew less about his own wife's schedule than I did. And one of those possibilities was a lot more realistic than the other. That was the moment suspicion stopped being abstract. Up until then, I had been trying to balance instinct against fairness. Trying to tell myself I could still be wrong. That there might be an explanation I hadn't earned yet. But now there was a real crack in the story. Something outside my own feelings. Something measurable. Dana had been using Megan's name more than once. And Megan apparently had not been living the same version of events. That night, when Dana got home, I watched her more carefully than ever. She had been out for dinner again. Thursday, same as always. Same energy going out. Same vague brightness coming back. She set her purse down, kicked off her heels, and asked if I was still awake in the gentle, half-playful tone she used when she wanted the room to feel easy. I asked how Megan was doing. She didn't freeze. She was too controlled for that. But she did hesitate. Then she said Megan was stressed but okay. I nodded and asked if Claire had been there too. Another pause. Smaller this time. She said yeah, Claire came late. I didn't push further. I didn't need to. The point wasn't catching her in some dramatic contradiction right there in the kitchen. The point was that I could feel the carefulness now. The editing. The way she was telling me just enough to keep the picture blurry. After that, I became quieter. Not mean. Not confrontational. Just observant. I noticed a new perfume bottle in the bathroom cabinet that she hadn't mentioned buying. I noticed that on Thursdays she shaved her legs even if we hadn't touched each other in days. I noticed she started changing her lipstick shade before leaving, wiping one off and trying another like someone expected to be looked at closely. I noticed she began taking her purse with her even for little things around the apartment, like checking the mail downstairs or taking trash out to the chute. And I noticed the way my own marriage had started training me to feel grateful for scraps. A quick kiss. A half hug. Her leaning against my shoulder for 10 seconds while scrolling her phone. Every tiny thing started feeling like evidence that maybe I was still loved, which only made me feel worse once I realized how low that bar had gotten. Then came the Thursday that shifted everything again. Dana was in the bedroom getting ready, and I was in the kitchen pretending to watch the news while mostly listening to drawers open and close. After a while she came out wearing a navy blouse I hadn't seen in a long time and stood by the counter searching through her purse. She looked frustrated for a second, then said she thought she'd left one of her cards in the car and went back downstairs to check. Her phone was still on the counter. It buzzed once. I looked before I could stop myself. The preview wasn't long. Just one line. But this time it included enough to wipe out whatever hope I had left that these were normal dinners with women who happened to enjoy tapas a little too much. It said, "Same hotel as last week?" After I saw that message, I stopped telling myself I might be overreacting. Same hotel as last week. There are some lines you can spend hours trying to soften if you really want to. You can force them into harmless shapes. Business event. Group reservation. Someone joking badly. But that line did not want to be softened. It landed exactly the way it sounded, and the worst part was how neatly it snapped everything else into place. The weekly dinners. The effort she put into getting ready. The vague names. The delayed kisses. The way she treated my touch like one more thing draining her. The problem was never that Dana had no energy left. It was that she had decided where she wanted to spend it. I heard the apartment door open again downstairs and moved away from the counter before she came back up. By the time she stepped into the kitchen, I was standing near the sink with a glass of water I hadn't wanted, pretending nothing had shifted. She found the card in her coat pocket, laughed at herself lightly, picked up her phone, and slid it into her purse without checking the screen in front of me. That detail mattered. Most people would glance down automatically. Dana didn't. Which meant she either already knew who it was likely to be, or she was careful enough not to reveal anything with her face while I was close enough to see it. She asked if I was okay. I said yeah. Then she smiled, kissed me with that same split-second delay that had started this whole thing in my head, and walked out the door looking polished, focused, and completely sure of herself. The second the door closed, the apartment felt different. Not emptier. Sharper. For a long minute I just stood there staring at the spot where her phone had been, feeling that sick, hollow pressure in my chest that comes when suspicion turns into structure. I still didn't know everything. I didn't know who she was meeting. I didn't know whether last week meant what I thought it meant or whether there were layers to this that I hadn't even reached yet. But I knew enough now to stop pretending these dinners were what she said they were. That night, I didn't sit on the couch waiting for her like I usually did. I started thinking backward. If there had been a hotel last week, what was last week? Thursday, obviously. Maybe another night too. I replayed her timeline in my head. The navy dress 2 weeks earlier. The black dress before that. The time she came home after 11:30 and said they had all gotten to talking. The names she'd tossed out too fast. Megan. Claire. Tara. Jenna. Lauren. Enough women to make any story sound comfortably crowded, but somehow never enough detail to picture them all at one table. I started seeing the shape of the lie more clearly. It wasn't that she had built some perfect cover story. She hadn't needed to. She had built a blurry one. One with just enough moving pieces that I would feel unreasonable trying to pin it down. That was what made it effective. Not precision. Softness. Dana came home close to midnight. She looked good in that slightly faded way people do after a long evening out. Lipstick mostly gone. Hair a little looser. Eyes alert, but cautious. She asked if I'd stayed up for her. I said I couldn't sleep. That much was true. Then I asked how dinner was. She gave me the usual version. Good. Fun. Loud place. Claire was being ridiculous. Megan had work drama. Tara was late. It all came out so smoothly that if I hadn't seen the message, I might have let the rhythm of it carry me the way it had before. Instead, I just listened. And the more I listened, the more I noticed what wasn't there. No restaurant name unless I asked directly. No full story from beginning to end. No detail that connected cleanly to another detail. Just little islands of information, each one plausible on its own, none of them forming a solid map. I asked if they were doing it again next week. She laughed and said probably. At this point it was basically tradition. Tradition. I nodded like that word didn't crawl all over me. That night, I lay awake beside her long after her breathing slowed. At some point, I realized I had crossed into a different stage of the story. I was no longer waiting for honesty. I was investigating someone who had already decided honesty was optional. The next morning, I kept my routine the same. Coffee. Work. Ordinary conversation. I even texted her around lunch the way I normally would, something small about grabbing more dog food on the way home even though we didn't even have a dog anymore. Pure habit. She replied normally. A heart. A thanks. A reminder about milk. That normalcy almost made me angrier than the message had. Because it told me how comfortably she could move between lives. After work, instead of going straight home, I drove downtown. I didn't have a perfect plan. Just a growing need to see whether her version of Thursday nights existed anywhere outside our kitchen. I started with the restaurant she had named the night before. The hostess stand was busy, and I knew better than to walk in there asking whether my wife had eaten with 4 women. Even in my own head that sounded pathetic. So I stayed outside, watched people come and go, and tried to imagine Dana inside. Maybe she had been there at some point. Maybe that was part of the trick. Dinner first, then elsewhere. A little truth wrapped around the real lunch. That possibility bothered me because it felt like something she would do. Give the story a real beginning so the ending stayed hidden. The next break came from something even smaller than the hotel message. Saturday afternoon, Dana was in the shower, and her purse was on the bedroom chair half open. I wasn't going through it. I need that clear. I wasn't kneeling beside it digging through receipts like some movie husband already halfway destroyed. But when I moved it so I could grab my jacket, something slid out onto the floor. A valet stub. Hotel parking. Dated the previous Thursday. I picked it up and stared at it so long the edges of the print started blurring. Not because I needed help understanding it. Because some part of me still hated how much I understood now. Same hotel as last week. Valet parking. Previous Thursday. Dana had not just lied once. She had a routine. I put the stub back exactly where it had been and sat on the edge of the bed listening to the shower run, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. At that point, I could have confronted her. Most people probably would have. But I knew how that would go if I did it too early. She would cry. Deny. Minimize. Say I was making ugly assumptions from scraps. And maybe she'd even be right about the scraps part, because I still needed one thing I didn't have. I needed to know who. Not because the man mattered more than what she'd done. Because the identity would tell me how long this had been growing inside my marriage without me seeing it. So I started paying attention to names. Every conversation. Every notification. Every hesitation. By then, Dana was already protecting her phone more obviously. Not in a panicked way. More like the carefulness had become reflex. Face down at dinner. Into the bathroom with her. Screen tilted away if she answered a text near me. It was almost impressive, in a sick way, how thoroughly someone can edit their life once they've decided they need to. Then, on Tuesday night, I got what I'd been missing. We were on the couch. She was half watching some home renovation show, half texting. I pretended to be focused on the TV. At one point she set her phone on the cushion beside her and went to refill her wine. A message lit the screen before it dimmed. I only saw the first name. Eric. No last name. No emoji. No label. Just Eric. When she came back, she picked up the phone so naturally you would have thought it had never been out of her hand. I asked, casually, who Eric was. That got me a pause. A real one this time. Then she said he was someone from medical billing who had been helping with a software issue at work. She said it while looking at the TV instead of at me. I nodded. And right there, with her profile lit by the screen and that glass of wine in her hand, I knew she was lying. Not because I could prove it yet. Because she answered too neatly and too vaguely at the same time. Same as always. A story built to sound boring, because boring stories don't invite follow-up. The next day, I called in late to work for the first time in months. Thursday was coming again, and by then I had enough to know it wasn't dinner. What I needed now was the truth in motion. That evening, Dana got ready the way she always did. Extra care. Extra glow. Extra distance from me. She said they were trying someplace near the river this time. She left at 6:15. I waited 10 minutes. Then I followed. Not close enough to be seen. Not stupidly. Just far enough back to watch her route. She did not drive toward the river. She did not drive downtown to any restaurant she had ever named. She drove straight to the hotel from the valet stub. I parked across the street with both hands locked around the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. Through the windshield, I watched her get out, smooth her dress, check her phone, and walk inside without even a glance around. No hesitation. No guilt. No uncertainty. Like she had done it enough times for the place to feel familiar. I sat there staring at the entrance, every bad feeling from the last few months rising into one brutal, undeniable shape. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Dana. She said dinner had just started and the place was already loud, so she might be hard to reach for a while. And as I looked up at the hotel doors she had just disappeared through, I saw a man step out of a dark SUV, glance at his phone, and head inside like he knew exactly who was waiting for him. I stayed in that parking lot for maybe 2 minutes after her text came in, but it felt longer. Dinner had just started. That was what she wrote. And there I was, staring at the hotel entrance she had just walked into, watching a man in a dark SUV head inside like he belonged in the same plan. That was the moment the last little part of me still hoping for some other explanation finally gave up. Not loudly. Not dramatically. It just went quiet. Because there are only so many ways a wife can lie to your face before the truth stops feeling shocking and starts feeling insulting. I got out of the car. I wasn't thinking about dignity or strategy or whether this was the smartest thing to do. I had spent months swallowing confusion, then weeks swallowing suspicion, then days collecting enough reality to stop gaslighting myself. I was done sitting outside my own life like I needed one more piece of evidence to earn the right to believe what I already knew. The hotel lobby was warm, quiet, and too polished for the kind of moment I was walking into. Everything in there looked expensive and calm. Soft lighting. Clean floors. The faint sound of glasses somewhere deeper inside the bar area. For one stupid second I noticed how ordinary it all looked, and that almost made me angrier. Because betrayal never happens in the dramatic way you imagine. Most of the time it happens under warm lights with somebody at the front desk asking if they can help you. I didn't go to the desk. I looked toward the bar first. And there she was. Dana was standing near the far side of it, not seated at some big table with women, not laughing with Megan or Claire or anybody else whose names she'd been using like cover. She was standing close to the man from the SUV. Close enough that there was no confusion about the energy between them. No awkward distance. No polite coworker body language. He had one hand low at her back, and she was smiling at him with a softness I hadn't seen directed at me in longer than I wanted to admit. That smile was the real reveal. Not the hotel. Not the lies. Not even him. That smile. Because it told me the thing I had been trying not to name from the start. She had not become a woman with no energy, no warmth, no affection left to give. She had simply stopped giving those things to me. I walked toward them before I could think too much about it. Dana saw me first. I watched the exact second her face changed. The softness vanished. The color drained. Her whole body stiffened like someone had yanked her back into the version of her life she'd been trying to step outside of. The man turned, followed her eyes, and then looked at me with the expression of someone realizing the story he had been sold was not as complete as he thought. Nobody spoke right away. I didn't need to. Everything was already there between us. Then I said the only thing that felt honest enough for that moment. I said, "So this is what being too tired for a hug looks like." Dana's face crumpled instantly, but even then, I didn't feel satisfaction. Just this cold, exhausted clarity. She started saying my name, started stepping toward me, started reaching for whatever script people reach for when the lie finally collapses in public. I held up a hand. Not dramatic. Just enough to stop her. Then I asked if this was one of the girls from dinner. That line landed harder than I expected. Not because it was clever. Because it stripped the whole thing down to how pathetic and ugly it really was. All those Thursdays. All those names. All those delayed kisses and careful excuses and tired little sighs when I touched my own wife in our own kitchen. And here she was, standing in a hotel bar with a man she clearly knew well enough to smile at like that. The guy looked between us and quietly stepped back. To his credit, he didn't puff up or act stupid. He looked uncomfortable, maybe ashamed, maybe just aware he had walked into the wrong end of someone else's marriage. Dana said his name then. Eric. So there it was. Not Chris. Not a software issue at work. Eric. The same name wrapped in a different lie. I asked her how long. She said it wasn't what I thought. I almost laughed at that. But I was too tired. Because I was standing in a hotel, looking at my wife and another man, after following her here from a fake girls' dinner. There was no version of what I thought that was harsher than what reality had already laid out on the table. So I asked again. How long? She started crying then, the real kind this time, not because she had suddenly found honesty but because the structure around her had collapsed. She said it had started a few months ago. First messages. Then drinks. Then one hotel. Then more than one. She kept talking, but after that, the timeline stopped mattering in the way it probably should have. Whether it was 3 months or 4, whether it turned physical after the second time or the fifth, whether she still planned to stop or had no idea where it was going anymore. None of it changed the basic truth. She had been living a second relationship in the same weeks she made simple affection from me feel like a burden. That was the humiliation at the center of it. Not just that she cheated. That she made me feel like I was asking too much by wanting closeness from my wife, while giving that exact energy somewhere else. I asked if every Thursday had been him. She hesitated. That was answer enough. Some were real dinners, she said quickly. Not all of them. But enough of them were lies that the distinction meant absolutely nothing to me. Once a routine becomes cover, every honest part of it turns rotten too. She said she had been unhappy. Of course she did. She said she felt disconnected from our marriage, from herself, from the routine of our life. She said Eric made her feel seen. She said the dinners had started as space to breathe and then became something else. That explanation might have meant something before the lies. After the lies, it was just decoration. Because unhappy people leave. They talk. They separate. They admit the truth. They do not spend months training their husband to expect less love while slipping out once a week to hand that love somewhere else. I asked if she had any idea what the last few months had felt like on my side. She looked at me through tears and said she knew she had hurt me. That wasn't the question. So I told her. I told her what it felt like to start doubting whether even touching her waist in the kitchen was welcome. To feel grateful for half-second kisses. To start wondering if I had become physically repulsive to my own wife. To lie in bed next to someone who said she was touched out and emotionally drained, then watch that same woman come alive in front of a mirror for nights that apparently had nothing to do with her marriage. That was the first moment she looked like she understood the real damage. Not because I caught her. Because she finally heard what she had turned me into while she was busy protecting herself. Eric quietly excused himself at some point. I barely noticed him leave. He was irrelevant by then. That might sound strange, but it's true. Once the truth is standing in front of you, the other person almost stops mattering. The real wound is the one inside the relationship you thought you were in. Dana kept crying. Kept saying she was sorry. Kept saying she never meant for it to get this far. I hate that phrase now. Nobody ever means for betrayal to reach the exact place they walk it to step by step. I asked her one last question. I asked whether she had ever planned to tell me or whether she was just waiting until she decided which life she wanted more. She didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I told her not to come home that night. Her face changed when I said it. Not because she thought I was joking. Because that was the moment this stopped being a terrible scene and became consequence. Real consequence. The kind that follows you back into ordinary life after the crying ends and the hotel lights don't hide anything anymore. She asked if we could talk tomorrow. I said there was nothing to talk about tonight that should have needed a hotel to uncover. Then I turned around and walked out. I expected to feel rage in the car. Instead I felt stripped. Like something had been torn off me that I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel again, same as before, but now there was no suspense left, only impact. I kept replaying tiny moments instead of the big one. Her tensing in the kitchen when I slid my arms around her. The delayed kisses. The quick face-down phone. The polished way she said people need their own lives. What she really meant was that she had already started building one that excluded me. She didn't come home that night. She texted around 1 in the morning saying she was at Megan's. I didn't answer. The next day she sent long messages. Apologies. Explanations. Shame. Confusion. The usual attempt to turn a chain of choices into a cloud of feelings. I read them once and put the phone down. When she came by 2 days later to get clothes and toiletries, she looked wrecked. No makeup. Eyes swollen. Smaller somehow. Like without the controlled version of herself in place, she didn't fully know how to stand in the house anymore. We talked, but only enough to make the practical next steps clear. I asked if there was anything else I didn't know. She said no. I didn't believe that fully, but by then it didn't matter. I had the important truth. The marriage I thought I was protecting no longer existed in the same form for her, and she had chosen deception over honesty long enough to kill whatever trust was left. She asked if I wanted to try counseling. I told her counseling is for people who are broken and honest, not broken and still lying while they book hotel nights. That ended the conversation. Over the next few weeks, we did what people do when something private and intimate dies in a practical world. We separated things. Bank stuff. Keys. Schedules. Her family eventually found out some version of it. Mine did too. Dana kept reaching for softer language when she described what happened. A mistake. A bad period. Emotional distance. I never corrected her in public, but in my own head I kept the wording clean. It was an affair. And it ran right alongside a campaign of making me feel like normal affection was too much to ask from her. That second part is what stayed with me most. Later, after enough time had passed for the shock to stop buzzing in my body all day, I realized something ugly but useful. The truth had started long before the hotel. Long before the phone previews and fake dinners and valet stub. It started the moment her warmth became selective. That was the first honest thing in the whole story. Not her words. Not her explanations. Her selectiveness. She still had energy. Still had anticipation. Still had tenderness. Still had that softness in her face when she wanted to be close to someone. I just wasn't the person she was bringing it home to anymore. That's the part I'll never unlearn. When basic affection starts feeling like a chore, sometimes it really is stress. Sometimes life is heavy and people go numb for a while. And sometimes they're not numb at all. Sometimes they're just spending the best parts of themselves somewhere else.